Hello, and welcome to this NJCU Center for the Arts digital event. We would like to ask everyone to please keep your cameras and microphones off during the program. There will be a Q&A section at the end of the program, and we will only be accepting questions and comments via the chat window. At the bottom of your screen if you are on a computer, or possibly the top right if you are on a different device, you should be able to see an option for chat. If you click that, it will open the chat window where you can type your questions so that they may be read aloud and answered. Thank you, and enjoy the event. Please note, the views and opinions expressed in this virtual event and presentation are solely those of the individual artists in their personal capacity and are not reflective of nor represent official policy, position, or views of New Jersey City University.
Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. I'm Stephanie Chaikin. I'm the director of the Center for the Arts at NJCU. And we're so happy that you are joining us for an amazing conversation with author Joanna Clapps Herman, which will be moderated by Dr. Edvige Giunta and Peggy Jackson. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our speakers today. Dr. Edvige Giunta is the author of Writing with an Accent, Contemporary Italian-American Women Authors, and co-editor of 5 anthologies, including The Milk of Almonds and Embroidered Stories. At NJCU, she is the professor of English, and she has trained scores of students in the art of memoir and created the first course devoted to the Triangle Fire. Her literary, nonfiction, and poetry appear in many journals and anthologies. She has been profiled in the New York Times and the Italian television RAI for her work in memoir and Italian American studies. Eddie's book, Talking to the Girls, Intimate and Political Essays on the Triangle Fire, co-edited with Mary Ann Tresciati, will be published in 2022 by New Village Press. Peggy Jackson is an editor for Hype Literary Magazine, published at New Jersey City University, where she studies creative writing. She received an honorable mention for the Margot Fragoso Literary Courage Award and the Kathy Potter Memorial Writing Award for Creative Nonfiction. She is an active member of the English Department Student Events and Publications Committee. Joanna Clapps Herman's most recent book, When I Am Italian, Quando, Sono, Italiana, was published in 2019, and it explores the question of whether it's possible to be Italian if you weren't born in Italy. Other books include a collection of fiction, No Longer and Not Yet, in 2014, and her memoir, The Anarchist Bastard, in 2011. She also co-edited 2 anthologies, Wild Dreams in 2008, and Our Roots Are Deep with Passion, 2006. She has recently had 18 prose poems accepted for publication. She has published widely in literary journals as a poet, fiction writer, and an essayist. And her website, a literary, cultural, and culinary site, is joannaclappsherman.com. So I'm going to hand this over to you, Eddie, to start us off.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and welcome everyone. And thank you so much, Joanna, for spending this hour with us. This is, I believe, is the last conversation of these last several months when we have had the pleasure of talking to a number of writers. And what a perfect way to come to the end of this series. I've had the privilege of knowing Joanna Clapps Herman and being inspired by her work for many, many years. And I love all of her work. But I must say that, Joanna, your last book, when I am Italian, quando sono italiana really touches me in a very particular way. And although that book speaks to the predicament of those who were not born in Italy, as someone who was born in Italy but no longer lives there, I still feel really that dilemma and go back and forth between those two different states of beings. So I'm going to ask you soon a few questions about this condition of being sometimes Italian and sometimes not. But perhaps you can start by reading us a little bit from the book so that our audience can hear from this beautiful work.
Edvige, cara amica, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm grateful to be here. And the NJU staff, I have to tell you, everyone, all of people who are in the audience are spectacularly welcoming, kind, professional, and helpful. So thank you to NJCU as well, and Peggy and Eddie. So yes, this last book did finally synthesize the dilemma I've been thinking about since I left home as a 17-year-old. I mean, up until then, there was no question. I was Italian. Yes, I was American, but some inner core was Italian, and that was just the truth. I didn't question it. That's the way it was. But once you leave that setting, that paradigm that explains, that creates your origins, you have to ask, yourself questions about that identity. So I'm going to read a little, just the opening of the first essay in the book, and it is the essay Quando sono italiana. And I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's too long, but I'm just going to frame it by saying, I am Italian. I am American. And some piece of my Italianness is as deeply real to me as my American self. But then there are gradations of the way in which I travel there and have come to know it more deeply. I recognize it when I'm out in the Mediterranean world. There are ways in which I study it. There are ways in which I embrace it. There are ways in which I imitate when I'm in Italy. Oh, that's the way they're dressing. I'm dressing that way too. And then there's just esagerata, an exaggeration because I'm so passionate about it. And finally, eventually, I came to the conclusion there's also a ridiculousness about it. Of course, I'm not Italian. Of course, I'm American. And all of those layers are in me. But this is, let's say, the core layer as a mature adult that I have developed. That goes back to my origins and my grandmother's origins and my great-grandmother's origins. Summer mornings, I slip into the sandals that are kept by the door before I slip out to my terrace in my nightgown, or in a loose dress to sit while my coffee is brewing. This is luxury in New York City. Wearing un vestaglia outside. Un vestaglietto is some kind of house dress, let's call it. Outside, in full view, but not in public. Half asleep, I sit and study my pots of flowers. The endless rain this spring forced such excessive blooming. Bright reds, single pale giotto pinks, a dark velvety red, 2 shades of coral. So I sit and gaze at those flowers, and then off into the distance at the Hudson River and the church. The subway descends into the tunnel, a noisy clung clatter. Gathering up my cup, my milk, my coffee from the kitchen, I set them out on the Moroccan tray table Of course, notice it has to be Mediterranean too. Look around again and slowly begin to drink my coffee. I bring the Times with me, but I never read it. I'm in that beautiful liminal state, not quite awake, not still asleep. There's breezes out there on the terrace. After my first cup of coffee, I visit each pot of flowers and inspect the plants. My body is relaxed under the thin fabric, loosely grazing my skin. The skirt flaps in the morning breeze. Is this blossom ready to be snapped or clipped? Then stuffed into the dirt, into the pot? Are there buds under the flower waiting to unfold? Are there buds waiting to bloom? This takes time and consideration. I don't act quickly. I stick my fingers in the dirt. How is it? Water? I go back to my coffee and sipping. If my plants need water, I'll spend some time going back and forth, filling the pots. This leads to varying colors of petal scattering over the terrace pavement and gently making pools of color. Then next, I get my broom and do as every Mediterranean woman knows to do. I sweep. Each brush calls up in me. I think I skipped something. Oh, well. Each brush calls up in me the anime di donna italiana, the spirits of the Italian women. They flow into me with each brush of the broom. They inhabit me. Brush, hush, a whisper from woman to woman. All of my Italian women are with me. All the Southern Italian women, all the Sicilian, Lucane, Calabrese, Neapolitan, Apugliese join in this convocation. They're with me in these mornings. All Mediterranean women sweep around their pots on their terrazza, in front of their doorways, around their plants. They bend to pick up a stray stem or pick up a pebble from the ground. They too are in their vestaglietta. They too sprinkle water on their plants. Then they throw some water on the hard pavement, throw a rag down to the ground, and the broom collects the rag in its bristles and then sweeps away the dark earth stains. Then they rest on their brooms and look off. All of this is real in me, something that lives in me, something I learned from my women. There are other gestures and postures that transport me to a similar state. In my hometowns in southern Italy, in Tolve, in Avigliano, in Naples, in Sicily, I see women crossing their arms over their breasts, standing outside their doorways. I know these women. I know this gesture. I want to stop and chat with them, pretend I live there too. When I snap the ends of string beans, men with good small stitches tug just so with each stitch. When I cut the bread toward my chest instead of cutting down and away from me, they are with me. The archaic sense of italianità beckons to me at these times. That's just the opening incantation, and then the rest of the essay goes through all the layers of the way in which I have explained this to myself. And when I was writing this essay, I sent it to Eddie right after I had finished. And I'm going to reveal this little secret about writing, because Eddie and I are deeply connected through our writing. We're writing partners as well as friends who cherish each other. And she said, and at the end I say, all right, I know I have to admit it. It's a confession. I am an American. She said, but then you have to add, Joe. just not when I'm sweeping my terrace. And what that was like, what better thing could you do is write one of the best essays you've ever written and have your beautiful, beautiful friend give you a line like that. So that's the framing here today, people. Thank you, Eddie.
Thank you, Jo. So wonderful. This is a piece of writing that moves me so deeply in its simplicity and its power, and how it goes to the core of a truly ancestral experience. And I just want to highlight that while your book is very much about this Italian identity, it also maps out the outlines of what it means to live between cultures, regardless of the culture that you come from. And I think that is something, that's the reason why the book has spoken to so many. I love what you said about the gradations and the way in which those gradations are mirrored in the cover of the book, with almost these echoes of the titles in the two
shadowing.
Yes, in two different languages. So one of the things that it's very interesting about the work that you have done in this book, but also in other work, is that on one hand, you really understand and try to capture the spiritual quality of what it means to reconnect or to connect with part of one's cultural heritage, whether it's rooted in your immigrant family in Connecticut, or in your ancestral land left by your ancestors. But every time you really, what is striking is that you always ground this very spiritual, you could even say elusive experience into physicality. So I'm thinking of that wonderful piece that you wrote for the Milk of Almonds on coffee, one of my favorite pieces of writing. Your piece is on needlework. You're writing about being with women in physical spaces, your recreations of Waterbury and your family and your community, and the gestures and the object. So could you talk about these? So on one hand, there is this negotiation between being Italian and being American, and then there is this other negotiation, the elusive experience of capturing the sometimes hidden identity, and then how real it is, how it's part of the quotidian. Could you talk about how you make that happen in the writing, how the process works for you?
I guess I would say, Eddie, I love that question. I think I would say that the privilege of the culture I came from in Waterbury, and I believe my sister came up with this phrase. Hi, Lucia, I know you're out there. That Waterbury is our ancestral Italian village. Like, there was enough there of what my grandparents brought from Southern Italy that it was an Italian village. It really was. And the ways of that, the ways especially, well, everyone, but of course we were with the women, the kids, and especially since we were girls, we were with the women. And they were deeply, deeply, deeply embedded in the quotidian in a celebratory way. I mean, they took themselves very seriously. They did not feel diminished by it. They were very proud of their very considerable abilities as gardeners, as cooks, as seamstresses, as homemakers, as hostesses. And very much when I travel in Italy, I re-experience. So they gave that to us so utterly, so deeply, that never had to be negotiated. In fact, leaving Waterbury and coming to New York, there was a long period. I have wonderful friends, many of whom are here, but there was still a loneliness for a certain kind of collective community in which the practices and the spirit of those practices made for a kind of spiritual life of the quotidian. That was where I came from, and I had to recreate it here. And I have to say, my Italian American community here, my Italian community here is huge, immensely important to me. Even though I love all my other friends just as much, there's something special that happens because we know this culture. Does that answer, sweetheart, if I answered what you asked?
Absolutely. It's bringing back to my memory an exchange between my father and my 8-year-old daughter, Emily, who's very much, the experience of the daughter of someone who emigrated, and she was 8 years old, and my father wanted to hug her and just was hovering, and so she said, please, Mom, tell Nonna I need my privacy. My father said, privacy? What's privacy? I don't think there is an Italian word for privacy. So, there are the drawbacks also to the sometimes collective identity, but I think you're describing something that is very important, and it's part not just of Italian culture, but other cultures, and the importance of family and community. And then when that is experienced as a loss, then writing creates this amazing space where to make it happen, and you make it happen for yourself in your experience as a writer, but you really make it happen for the readers. I think it's a really coming home, and I'm really grateful for that. So last week we had the pleasure of having Emily Bernard with us, and Emily in 2009 started this 100 word group, which has generated many incarnations and reincarnations, and we are in a 100 word group ourselves. So you have written memoir, you have written essay, you have written fiction, you have written poetry, but over the last few years, you've really turned your attention to the flash form, writing in a 100 word group, as well as developing some of those pieces. Could you talk about the difference between writing flash and writing in the long form, or whether you're writing fiction or memoir or essay? My students from my flash course, which I'm teaching for the first time this semester, are here. And so we have been grappling the whole semester with understanding what is the soul of the flash piece? How is it different, the story that you tell in a flash piece from the story that you tell in a long form piece?
Well, I think that all storytelling has the same gift of bringing you through an experience, through an adventure where something very specific happens. And you begin somewhere, you tell your audience where you are, who's involved, and then you gradually, slowly bring them up to this moment of turning point, after which there's no turning back, and you go down to the conclusion. And I like to say that that moment is, it's an extreme moment. It's a blood moment. It's like everything changes after that. And I believe that's in every short piece of fiction, every single one. And I think, I'm just going to read something about, I love Tolstoy, I love Homer, I love Virginia Woolf, but this is something that Tolstoy said about War and Peace, which is of course epic, right? So these are wide dimensions. People have loved, envied, sought truth, virtue, were carried away by passions. There was always the same complex mental and moral life. And then the other form that I just mad for, adore, is the haiku, which is really where you take the tiniest split second in a particular season, in a particular place, and you take a moment where something is caught that implies or shows minuscule movement. And I would say that the short or microfiction or whatever, sudden fiction, combines those two. In other words, of course, you're always dealing with these powerful human issues, but then you try to find this tiny little moment that captures that human experience, where something very intense happens. Now, the 100-word pieces can veer away from the narrative and go just into the poetic and just capture a beautiful memory. I'm gonna read the very first 100-word piece I wrote, which, by the way, I hated. I just thought it was just horrible and stupid. And then I looked back and I thought, no, I actually do like that piece because it was new to me. And I'm going to try and see if I can talk about it a little bit after in terms of what I just said. So I was up at my sister's, I think this is 2 years ago, and we spent a lot of time on her back porch on the second floor. So insects stitch seams along the late afternoon, sew backyards into broad sheets of lucid air. My sister and I sit on her second-story shaded porch, scattering a few sentences here and there. The uncommon quiet calls for listening. The leaves move so lightly, we easily lift one leg after the other over the porch rail and step off weightlessly into the branches, traveling from tree to tree, yard to yard, following bird songs that yield across the roofs and porches, surrendering our need for gravity. We know it will all depend on just how deftly we use our feet. So in that piece, I would say the theme, the human theme, the deeply human theme is the connection between my sister and I in that moment. That's implied, that we are so intimate, we could sit in the quiet of that beautiful late summer afternoon with just the leaves moving and only a few words. And it's such a spiritual, delicate space that then I was able, and I would say this was the crisis point or the turning point, is when I say, we easily lift one leg after the other over the porch rail and step off weightlessly into the branches. In other words, so I go from the quotidian real of sitting on the porch to a kind of magical other, as if one could actually do that. Because I believe in those moments when you feel that so profoundly, another reality can come to you. And that was, I would say, the turning point. And the resolution was, though, acknowledging that gravity is real. And if we weren't careful, we were going to fall to the ground. A lot of the structure in this piece is implied, I would say.
Thank you. That's beautiful. And I think it really captures the way in which the flash piece, it's really about a sliver of experience, but also a sliver experience that reverberates and illuminates a larger experience. Will you read us a few more of your flash pieces?
Sure, I'll be happy to. So the other thing, I love the 100-word piece. It's been a revelation to me. And I see a couple of my friends here who have joined in this practice in other groups or in, and over and over, I hear from people, this is an amazing form. I don't know what it does. It's somehow that exact 100 words, but not intending to publish it in the New Yorker. You have a precision, you write for a precision, but also nothing's at stake, and it gives you a certain freedom, I believe. So it's definitely a liminal place to write, and I think that's part of its astonishing. In other places, I have to reach harder for this, but in this form, it comes to the form. So anybody who's not doing it and wants to, I think it's an amazing form. So this one is The night roofs over my restless dreams. Some good nights I follow tight turns of the small shop-lined streets that fill me with inexplicable longing. I've found my way back, but I'm not quite sure where I'm going. Another night, the painted blue fan my mother brought back from Naples is incomprehensibly broken and crumbled in the trash. But how, I plead with my mother. She's indifferent. She doesn't remember that she gave it to me. She doesn't remember that it's important. In another dream, Bill has come home. It's urgent that we move about carefully so that we don't jeopardize his tenuous return. So, these are dreams that I had. And you notice that the stepping carefully is echoed from the other piece as well. And it's, the nighttime and dream life, of course, are they're a natural poetic space. I'm going to read one more. I'll read one more, and then if you want me to stop for the moment or ask me another question. So I lost my husband about 7.5 years ago, and he's very much a part of my writing now. He was part of my writing when he was alive. We wrote together, in the sense that we read each other, everything, we edited each other. And he's still a part of my writing. So somebody showed me a film. This is in fact, in reality, he showed me a film in which Bill appeared in a couple of frames. And it was so strange to see my beautiful husband at the end of his life in just a few fleeting frames. A few frames in the middle, then a few more towards the end of a very short film about a writer friend of ours, like a glimpse in a dream where our beloved dead don't recognize us or remember us. My husband is in his red cashmere, always too cold as he aged, looking fragile, sweet, as he sits attentive in the audience of Lewis's reading. His skin is pale, papery. His spirit is still there in his face as he comes and goes so quickly between the edits. I can't make him pay attention or even glance at me. And in this case, I would say the crisis moment comes at the end of the piece. That, of course, both because he's dead and because it's a piece of film.
Thank you. Thank you, Jo. The power of your writing to evoke the absent and to bring it so close, so intimate, so present. It's really wonderful. And I can see that there are lots of comments and questions. So I really would like to give an opportunity to our audience to hear your answer to their questions. I'm going to invite Peggy Jackson, who is one of our students here at NJCU and one of my wonderful collaborators in organizing this event and co-host of this event, to get us started with the Q&A. Peggy?
Okay. Hi everyone. Thank you so much, Joanna, for these great readings. It's such a refreshing way to be ending off the semester. To everyone in the audience, if you haven't had the chance, please post your questions in the chat and we'll do our best to get to as many as we can, if not all of them. I'll start with a question of my own, which goes right along with all of your readings across these multiple genres. So because you write in so many genres, do you think there is a way in which writing each of them affects your abilities and your creativity in other genres? And how you think being proficient in Flash might help you be more proficient in writing long form like novels?
That's a great question, Peggy. Thank you so much, sweetheart. It's lovely. I've had several conversations with you and I'm glad to be talking to you again. And yes, very, very much. I would say sometimes I write poetry not because I think it's any good, because mostly I don't think I'm much of a poet, although the 100-word form has freed something in me that's more poetry-like. But sometimes I'll do it just because the way you have to pay attention to every single syllable in a poem is such a good exercise. It's so powerfully important to learning how to articulate closely enough everything you have to say in any form. I would say switching the frame to going to the larger pieces when I'm trying to do a longer book and keeping the scope is harder for me, is much harder for me, which, by the way, if you look behind Peggy's head, you'll see that she has an outline in color showing the scope of something large that she's working on. And it's exactly what one needs to do, is to find a system by which one keeps track of, yes, I'm moving from here to there, to there, to there. And how do I make sure that that art works? And I always like, for me, I love to go to the smallest piece. That's where I'm most comfortable. The sentence, the paragraph, the short piece. Then like, okay, if I'm just working on this paragraph, then I can step back and look and see where it fits into the larger whole. So each one, yes, affects the other. Of course, a lot of it is very subliminal too. And I'm a great believer. I learned this from Francine Duplessis Gray many, many years ago. I let the pieces call to me. I never say, I'm going to do this. Never, it's not me. It's like, this piece is the piece that is insisting I write it. Now go work on it. And then it's like, I have no choice. That's what I'm obligated to do. It's a vocation.
Thank you. That it is a very enlightening answer. From the audience, Gabriella asked, how do you think settling in New York City as an adult has added to your Italian identity? How do you think your identity would be different if you were in the Midwest or somewhere in America where you couldn't buy Italian bread, for example?
Well, hi, Gabriella. Always lovely to hear from you. I would say, Gabriella, I would probably not be able to do that. I don't think I could live in a place. And in fact, by the way, when I first moved to New York, you could not buy olive oil in the grocery store. I remember that so vividly. It was like too exotic, but there was Little Italy downtown, of course. When I moved to New York, of course, there were Italian neighborhoods, and especially back then in the 60s, they were still deeply, fully, vividly alive. Whereas, of course, now it's more touristy downtown. And of course, the West Village was still Italian. But really, I would say it was finding the artistic and intellectual community 25 years ago that really impacted me because it gave me, in other words, I had all of my deep familial Italianness, but I didn't have the coordinate intellectually and artistically. And when I found that community, that was like finding my new family, my intellectual family. And I would say that was the most significant aspect of New York. And that came late. That came very late. And none of my family was living here. My sister had moved away. And at one point I realized I'm achingly lonely for my community. I used to go back and forth, and they were two different lives. And that was painful, frankly. So what else do you want to ask me, people?
Staying on topic with community, Annie asked, tell us how you're passing the torch of Italianita to your granddaughter.
Well, I am negotiating that. First of all, I decided to call myself Nonna, even though it has a bit, we called our grandmother Grandma. Whereas my mother had called her grandmother Mamaran, Mama Grande. And my father had called his grandmother Mama Non. But I just felt like I had to get it in there somewhere. My husband was Jewish. My son identifies as Jewish. He's married a deeply Jewish woman. So that will be the predominant culture in her life. So I'm carving out particular things to hold on to with her. But it really, I speak to her in Italian. I've written little, let me see, I'll read you a little, okay, I'm going to read you a little song I wrote. I wrote 6 songs when she was born for Noah Zell, or James calls her Zelly Belly, which I love. And before I knew her name, because you don't tell the name in a Jewish community before the naming day. So I didn't know what her name was, so I called her Lady Baby. But then by now I knew her name. Noah Zell, mia nipotina, a still point. So completely of this moment, she isn't the future yet, nor the past. Although all sides wish to sing to her, give to her, wish upon a star with her, for her, good wishes, to be witches, to conjure for her. Around the fire, we'll all dance in this moment, in this still not believable moment, after trouble, travails, travels, losses, and procedures, a quietly persistent, tiny miracoluccia. Only sitting with her on my chest is real. The rest is conjure, hope, spell. It was too long a hope, too long a delayed longing. So the main thing I'm doing, Annie, is I use Italian words with her. I call her Piceniana, Piccolina, Figlia mia, because she's so tiny. And I'm hoping as she gets older, we will cook, we will sew, we will set up the nativity scene, we will do all the things that are still so important to me. But I love to, in those songs, I used a lot of little Italian words, and I do that with, when I'm writing about her.
Speaking of, that's a question. Speaking of the teaching Italian, Mike Fiorito asked, what do you think about the way Italian diaspora studies are evolving and becoming more inclusive?
So Mike is asking the way in which Italian studies is being more inclusive. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, evolving and becoming more inclusive.
I think for me, that's still not articulatable, Mike. I'm not sure. And hi, honey. I'm not sure. I feel like we're all working hard to figure that out. One thing that Eddie and I have talked about a great deal is we have to make a connection between the Italian American artistic and writing world with the Italian. And they are teaching courses in Italian American literature in some of the universities, but they never in touch with us, who are really their main people, really, but they don't know that yet. And they're uncomfortable with it. They don't quite know how to embrace us yet. So that's one thing. I know the Calandra Institute is doing things about that are brilliant. So is Eddie. She's always reaching out because she has that bridge. And I hesitated about asking my relatives in Southern Italy. I didn't know if I should ask them. I probably should have, but I didn't. But my friend, Claire Gardner, who was my closest friend when I lived in Torino, is in the room today. I saw her enter the room. And that's lovely. That's just, I think maybe it will be person to person that will make the bridge. I think we're working on it. I think we need to go to Italy and hold and create, artistic communities there for the summer and then get to know people that way. I am not certain yet. I feel we're in the excavation stage of figuring this out. That's what I know so far. I don't think I'm particularly up on this or have a lot to say about it.
Shifting a little bit, Judith asked if you could give us a differentiation of the short form versus flash. What would you say is the main difference between the two?
The 100-word form and flash, I'm going to take it as that question. Is that right? Judy, is that you asking that? Yeah, okay. So the flash fiction form should have the narrative structure in it. So the 5-point narrative structure is, you know, everybody knows what it is. It was defined by Aristotle when he defined the tragic structure, and there's the setting, which tells you where you are, who's involved, and what's at issue. And then this leads to a complication, which leads to a crisis, which leads to a consequence, which leads to which way is this going to get resolved or not, which leads to the catharsis ending. I really love that form. I found it very helpful when I was writing fiction. I used to eschew it and think, oh, that's so trivial, it's so silly. Who needs to pay attention to plot? You know, in my arrogance. And then I went to try to learn it, and it was hard because it's the bones, it's the architecture, and it really works. Where are we on time? I'm going to read you a quick piece. I'm going to read you. This is not mine. This is not my short piece. Okay, and this is a pretty deadly piece. So this is, I would say, the 100-word form can be poetry, can be almost haiku, can be the caught moment, can be just a slip of memory. No, the short or the sudden fiction has to actually have a story involved where something happens in the world, not in your head, in the world. Okay, so here's a piece of short fiction that I found that really exemplifies this. I'm sure now, Mommy, the girl said to her mother, breaking into tears, God is really there and he's full of love. Why are you so sure? I've seen him and he spoke to me from heaven. It's the most wonderful place in the world, the girl answered so assuredly and fervently that all her mother could do was to stab her with the knife she was chopping the onion with. The girl was so young, still without sin. Her life was so miserable. She begged for change on the streets. Surely in no time at all, she would start selling her body. Then the glorious heaven and her God full of love would no longer accept her. For her part, she would go to hell, the mother thought, while driving the knife in for the 10th time. That's a piece of sudden fiction. And it's an extreme version of it, but it's not unusual that there's a really intense thing like that in a good piece of sudden fiction. It's a mother and a daughter, they're talking about God. And then we get the more complex circumstances behind her. She feels her only ability to save her daughter is to kill her. So when she lifts that knife, right, talk about everything changes and you can't come back. So does that give you a sense of the difference? You know, the other is very eloquent and liminal and trance-like, and it's beautiful and it can have elements of this, but sudden fiction must have a real story in it where things actually happen. So Peggy, do we have anybody else who wants to ask me something?
I think we're getting close to the end. So I want to thank everybody, and I'm just going to steal Joanna back for a second because I would like to ask a couple of questions that might help my wonderful students who are right now working on producing their final project, which is the digital chapbook of flash pieces. Some are working on flash nonfiction, some are working on flash fiction. No one is doing just 100-word pieces because we really want to experiment with different lengths. And two questions that have been coming up often. One is how to really tear down these mistaken beliefs. In order to be universal, you shouldn't be specific, which is very persistent. Okay, and so how does specificity, great specificity, help create on the page an experience that is really open to everyone? And that's part one of the question. Part two is, you have your own collection of short stories, even your memoir, personal essay books. They are several pieces woven together with great complexity, but also they include pieces that could possibly stand alone. And you have edited anthologies. So the question of structure and how to assemble a series of different pieces together is one that you have dealt again and again. So what advice, what guidance do you have for these writers who now have to assemble these various pieces in a sequence? So specificity, how the specificity
First of
can
all,
create universal, and then the structure.
you cannot move anybody. You simply are not, it's not, nobody wants to hear, people want to hear stories. They really want to know what is happening in a very specific moment, in a very specific place. And I think in the smallest time possible is where you get your most powerful, vital moments that just move people deeply emotionally. And I believe you have to go into 5-minute moments, 10-minute moments to bring your audience into the experience you want them to feel so deeply. So I always say, so are they at the kitchen table? Are they drinking a cup of coffee? I always want to know, where are we? What time of day is it? The more specific, the more powerful it's going to be. Every time you do that, every time you evoke exactly how the burnt coffee has turned into an acrid smell that is making somebody want to leave the room, the more strong the piece is going to be. As to the bringing the pieces together, that's an incredibly important question. And what I love to do is I love to lay all the pieces out on the floor in groupings. And then I like to play with them like Tetris almost, like, yes, these 3 things go together. Okay, this one is only by itself. What does that mean? Is it an interstices piece? Well, I'll put it over here for now. Then there are 10 together. Then there are 2. Then there are 5. What does that mean? Okay. And then I begin to see a visual rhythm and a theme rhythm. And I write on big sheets of paper, food pieces, farm pieces, traveling pieces, so that I can create in my head the sense of thematics and what the flow should be. Of course, chronology can help, but chronology isn't the only way. I sometimes think, I love the structure that a lot of people use, which is there are groupings of things, and then there are tiny little pieces between these larger groupings that kind of are like little bridges. So I think it's very important to do it in the concrete. Don't try to do it in your head. Don't even try to do it on the computer screen. Print everything out and look at it. And maybe even bring a friend over and color code it. Like Peggy has color coded her characters. I think color coding, the more visual cues, the better. The more you help yourself. I color code my characters when I'm writing them, so that it's like I can see, oh yeah, purple, red, blue, so I could see what the rhythm is. And to me, the more you concretize it, the better. Was that, Eddie, did I answer you?
Yes, thank you. Just that, again, we go back to the physicality of the experience. And I think, you're reminding us how the work of writing is not abstract work. It's really the physical work of sitting down, getting the work, or taking those pages and spreading them on the floor and feeling your way through the story that you're telling. We're getting close to the end of our wonderful hour with you, and I was wondering if you could bring us to a close, maybe reading another couple of short pieces.
Sure. It'd be my pleasure. My pleasure. Okay. I have a couple of things that are on my mind. Okay. Because we were just talking about writing, this is a piece that I've written it's in my book, and so my son is a neuroscientist, which of course I love that he's a neuroscientist, but it's also because he and I like to talk about how the brain works, and he's taught me a great deal about how the brain works. Especially we've talked about the way the brain works when you're trying to write. So this is something I wrote about writing, and when my writing goes well, which I just want to read that, and then we'll see if you want me to read anything else. So this was a paragraph in a larger essay. My best writing happens when I am so completely in the flow that I find myself working exactly at the point where language emerges from my unconscious. Usually I'll be writing away when I sense that something ineffable, something akin to thought, is crawling up from my swampy unconscious that's trying to come out, to emerge. Fragments begin to push into the other, into the ether, trembling towards language. If I stay with this hardly, barely real, with these bits of images, these traces of sound, these threads of words, they begin to form, they pool, collide on an unholy shoreline. Words, ideas, sentences crawl, rush, aggregate as if on their own. If the day has grace, if this primal slurry heats, if it combines into tissue, then that tissue can be called writing. So that is the essence of the writing process.
Well, John, I know you love holy images. We should have printed holy images and with this and call it the writer's prayer. So we can all look at it in our hard moments. What a perfect way to end here, because you know, for all my wonderful student writers, they are really putting those last efforts and finding what is the extra thing that you have to write, what is the structure, what is missing, what is the right title, what is the last line. And I think you've given us so much inspiration, and for all the writers and friends who joined us today. So thank you so much for spending this time with us. Peggy, thank you for the wonderful co-hosting. Stephanie and Anna and Sabrina, the NJCU Center for the Arts has provided a wonderful space. Thank you to the students of the English Department, Student Events and Publications Committee, for working with me organizing these and other events. And thank you so much to our audience for your wonderful comments and questions. Have a wonderful day. Thank you. And thanks again, Joanna. Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Eddie and Peggy and Joanna. It's just really magnificent. And not only magnificent in hearing your words and your writing, but hearing your technique. It's inspirational and specific, and it's amazing. So thank you so very much. I also want to thank with all my heart Anna Carhart, our theater manager, and Sabrina Sabalo, our box office manager and Zoom maven. We can't do it without you. We have some upcoming events that we would like you to join us for. The Honey Dewdrops, who did a wonderful concert 2 weeks ago, are doing on Thursday a songwriting workshop at 11:10 a.m. So you can sign up, it's for free. And then coming up, we have our BFA students. We've had 3 artist talks. This is the last one on Friday. Please join us for that. Really, really inspirational work that has been going on from our students. Guy Davis, Roots of the Blues, Wednesday, May 5th at 10 a.m. talking about the history of the blues and giving great examples. Agua es vida, water is life. Mexico Beyond Mariachi is doing a beautiful production. Part of it has been filmed, and part of it a Q&A about the making of the work with the artists. Have anything else? Yes, Baron Ryan is doing an educational program about his life, destined for greatness. So please join us for that. He gave a wonderful, amazing concert this past weekend. So you can never be bored at NJCU. Please visit our njcu.edu/arts and come visit us often for all of our programs. And we hope
NJCU. Thank you so much.
You're
I'm very
welcome.
grateful.
Absolutely, Joanna. Thank you. Eddie, I'm going to turn it over to you for closing.
Thank you again. Thank you for joining us and being part of our community. And we have so many wonderful events coming up, and we're already plotting the fall events. Thanks again for being such enthusiastic participants in this conversation. Joanna, you are as wonderful as always. Have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye. Ciao.